Hi guys, today we have a very special guest with us. It's Michael Shermer, who is an American science writer, an historian of science, founder of the Skeptics Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine Skeptic. And is also the author of, and I hope I counted them correctly, 19 books, including Why People Believe Weird Things, The Science of Good and Evil, Why Darwin Matters, The Believing Brain, and more recently, and which will be the main topic of our conversation today, Heavens on Earth, the scientific search for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia.
Yep, I will show you that book here, just so we know what we're talking about here.
Oh yeah, I don't have a physical copy.
There it is.
Only the ebook. Yeah.
Actually, this is the European edition. The UK publisher did a different cover than the one that we have in the United States. But so it's a big globe with its in its hands. So the key is the subtitle that it's a scientific search for the afterlife and immortality and utopia, not religious. So so that's it. That's my newest book, just came out in January.
Oh yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I didn't know that the European cover was different. Because
they always do that. I have an American publisher and then a UK publisher. And then I have some translations coming out in Germany and a few other, Hungary, I think, Chinese. Anyway, a few others I forget.
Yeah, that's nice. Okay, so to start off with, one of the main themes of your book, of course, is immortality. And since the very dawn of humankind, or at least since the time we have written history, we get accounts of very ancient people struggling with the reality of our mortality, our finitude, and trying to come up with ways of overcoming that, let's say, obstacle. That would perhaps be the ultimate obstacle for humankind. And the first major mental technology, let's say, people resorted to was religion, right? In what ways have people tried to overcome their own mortality by appealing to the divine?
Yeah, I think religion was really the first on the scene for a lot of different things regarding human social life and existential questions. And, science is pretty late in the game of only a few centuries old. So we're behind by many, many millennium to make up in terms of constructing a viable worldview based on reason and science and empiricism and material, just a strictly material, natural world, no supernatural, no paranormal, no magic, no real magic, to explain things. And that's really the basis of my all my other books. My life's work really is to construct a coherent and comprehensive worldview without any supernatural or paranormal or superstitious magic. And I think I've been able to do that, more or less. And so my latest book is on that subject regarding the biggest question of all, what happens after you die. And part of the problem is of imagining what happens when you die is you can't imagine it, because to imagine something you have to be alive. So I can imagine being on Mars, I can imagine space travel, I can imagine all kinds of things, but I can't imagine not imagining. That is not existing. You can't do it. And so that creates the sort of cognitive basis for constructing various scenarios by which you continue on into whatever after the death of your body. That is, our intuitions tell us that somehow the stuff floating around up there, the thoughts, continue on beyond the brain, even though we know that your thoughts are entirely dependent upon your brain. And we know that from neuroscience research on strokes and tumors and Alzheimer's and other diseases that kill the neurons. And when the neurons are dead, whatever the function was associated with those neurons, that also disappears. So that tells us that that no brain, no mind, no material substance, no immaterial, incorporeal consciousness. You have to have the one to have the other. So as far as we know, when you die, that's it. Just boom, boom, lights out. And when people ask me, well, where do you go after you die? I say, same place you were before you were born. To which most people say, what do you mean? I wasn't anywhere before I was born. Right. I didn't exist before I was born. Right. You're not going anywhere after you die, and you won't exist after you die. That's it. Now, of course, the core of my book is all the, sort of examining from a scientific perspective the answers to that, rebuttals to that. Well, no, you go to heaven with Jesus or whatever, physically or incorporeally, your soul, religious versions or scientists who want to upload your mind into the cloud so you can keep going. These are all serious attempts to answer this question, none of which I think hold water.
Right. So, and I think another reason why people create this notion of immortality or the possibility of immortality is because cognitively we are capable of individuating people and creating a mental abstraction of their individuality and turn it into something that perhaps is different and not really identified with their body, and that can go on, right?
That's the idea. Yes, correct. That the pattern of information that represents you can somehow be copied, and therefore you can continue. And this is premised on the idea that you're more than just your physical self, in the sense that all the material you are made out of, all your cells, almost all of them are recycled every 7 to 10 years. So the you I'm looking at right now, right through that little magic window there, is not the same you as a decade ago. You've recycled, but the pattern's the same. You look roughly the same, except you've aged, say, 10 years from a decade ago. But the pattern is what counts. That's you, not your physical body. So I think we can dispense with the idea of you have to have a perfect high fidelity copy of you to be resurrected. It just needs to be your pattern. And artificial intelligence people are fond of talking about something called substrate independence. That is, intelligence can run on different kinds of machines. The brain is a kind of a warm, wet, protein-based machine that's biochemical, and computers have a completely different platform for those forms of intelligence. So the substrate is different, silicon rather than protein. So whatever heaven is, it would surely be something like not material, something like a cloud, a computer, or whatever, in which you go to a quantum field, maybe. Okay, these are all scenarios that I deal with in the book. They all have serious problems, but they're all viable in terms of these are some of the things people think of when they think of what happens when you die.
Right. And another thing that you tackle on your book is the fact that there's recent scientific literature that really says that there's no scientific basis for terror management theory and even perhaps chaos management theory, right?
Yeah, so this is one theory that you run into fairly quickly when you start a literature search on this subject, which is called terror management theory. That is, the theory is that people are terrorized at the prospects of dying, so they become productive, creative artists, musicians, architects, scientists, technologists, inventors, whatever. That all of civilization is due to the fact that humans became at some point in our deep past aware of our own mortality, and that led to becoming productive, creative individuals. I don't think so. I think the explanation for that lies in many other areas that I present in the book. But the idea, the core idea that you're terrified, most people aren't terrified, and so but their rebuttal to that is, but it's subconscious. You just don't know you're terrified. Well, how would I know if I don't know? Well, we trick it out of your brain by priming your brain, by asking you to think about your death and then having you do some task, and then subjects that are primed to think about their death and do the task perform the task differently than those who were not primed to think about their death. Anyway, that's the protocol, the experiment. And I show that I think they're not measuring what they think they're measuring. In their heads, they're thinking, these people are thinking about death. Well, maybe for a moment there they did when you primed them, but I think people are thinking about something else. I think it's tapping something else. Anyway, I don't want to give too much away, but that's, I spend part of the first chapter on that in the book, showing that, in fact, we know what people think about just before they're going to die. I mean, super primed to think about their death. These are Texas death row inmates whose executions were preceded immediately by the opportunity to give a final statement. And these are all recorded on the Department of Justice, the Texas Department of Justice website. And you can read them. And I did. 480 something of them. And I had graduate students also read them, and we all coded them in different categories. And, terror and anxiety was, not even on the list. It's just not something these guys are thinking about. Mostly what they're thinking about is it's very positive emotions. In fact, love and affection and forgiveness and, apologies given and restitution for the wrongs that they did, and looking forward to seeing Jesus in heaven and all this stuff. It's all very positive, so I think I pretty much debunked that theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. And so, getting now into a bit into the concept of utopia and what we could call, perhaps, according to your title, an heaven on earth. And we could also have,
yeah. Heaven is right there.
Yeah.
In other words, it's here. It's here. This is the premise of my book. The central thesis of a thread that runs throughout the whole book is that whether there's an afterlife or not doesn't really matter, because we don't live in the afterlife. We live in this life. We don't live in the hereafter. We live in the here and now. So this is what counts now more than anything else. And, I can't prove there's no afterlife, and it's not that I want there to be no afterlife. Of course, last time I closed my eyes here, it would be nice to wake up, I think, some other place. And there's my old friends, Stephen Jay Gould and Carl Sagan and Christopher Hitchens, my parents, people that I have loved and lost. It would be nice to see them again in some form. Although I wouldn't want to go to a heaven that was so boring. I had a college professor ask me when I was religious, and I was witnessing to him about the wonders of religion and the afterlife. You get to go to heaven, and he wanted to know if there were golf courses and tennis courts in heaven. Well, I don't know. Why? He says, because I'd be bored. I need something to do, competition, something to challenge myself every day, to kind of push myself, to better myself. And I thought, yeah, And then I remember Christopher Hitchens saying that the Christian heaven would be like celestial North Korea, like this dictator that, knows everything you're thinking. Like, that doesn't sound heavenly to me. And, for an eternity, bliss for an eternity, I mean, that sounds boring. So I don't know, in terms of like, what are we talking about when we're talking about going to heaven or living forever? You only have to think about it for a few minutes, and you realize, what, there's something inherently wrong with this whole idea. If you're physically resurrected, Jesus is physically resurrected to heaven, right? The body has been removed from the tomb, and he's taken up into this is supposedly what happens to us, according to some Christian sects. You are physically resurrected into heaven. Okay, what's up there? And is it me actually right out of the grave? Because you could, unlike Jesus is missing from the tomb, people that supposedly go to heaven, their bodies are still in the grave. So what's up there if the body is still in the dirt? Well, maybe it's a copy, like transporting Captain Kirk on the Enterprise to some planet. How is that working? Are they taking the atoms and physically moving the atoms from one place to another, or are they copying the pattern in that little tube and then reconstituting the pattern on the planet with the atoms from there? Well, of course, this is all fiction, but this would be the same idea of what actually goes to heaven. A copy of you? Is it you? In any case, how old are you when you're there? And these Christian sects say, well, you're 30 because that's the age Jesus was when he was crucified. Yeah, but I'm 63. So what happens to the 33 years of memories and experiences that I've had since I was 30? Where do they go? Because that's part of me too. Well, okay, you get all that. Yeah, but how are those memories stored in a 30-year-old brain? And in any case, the memories are changing, constantly changing. There's no fixed you, that snapshot of you right at that moment that's copied and sent to heaven. That's not you, because you are always changing. So, this thing is just fraught with logical problems that have to do with the philosophy of identity and the self. What is the self? Who are you? So and both, not only do religious people have a problem with all this, scientists who envision the day when we can copy your connectome. The connectome is the analog to the genome. This is the pattern of information in your brain of all your memories that are presumably fixed in there in a static form through the synaptic connection. So this is called the connectome. It's a huge, huge, huge file if you could do this. Can't be done at the moment, but in principle, you could take the brain out, slice it all the way down, and copy every single synapse. Or maybe in the far future, we'll have a sophisticated brain scanner you put on your head, and it scans your connectome. Every last thing, uploads the file into the cloud and turns it on. Well, what's there? Because if you did this while you're still alive and you're sitting here with your point of view self looking out through your eyes going, well, I'm right here. That's just a copy of me. That's not me. Any more than a twin looks at its sibling and says, well, there I am. No, that's not what twins do. They say, well, there's a different person than me with slightly different experiences than me. And I think that's the best you could do with a mind uploaded singularity type resurrection of people who have lived, a copy, an uploading. I don't see that it would be you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, those are very good points. But now talking a bit about utopias on Earth, let's say, because we also have secular utopias, and we have small experiments done, or that people tried to do with small communities, particularly during the 19th century. And we also had large-scale social experiments with communism and so on. So what would you say are the parts of human nature that are responsible for the failure of these kinds of social experiments, let's call them that, and what people that try to do these things don't take into consideration about human beings?
Yeah, experiments is a good word because that is what they are in a way of experimental communities and societies trying to figure out the best way to live. And that's the problem right there. There is no one best way to live. There's multiple best ways to live. And we need to have a system set up that is flexible, malleable. You can tweak the variables, change the conditions as needs change, as wants change. The problem is that people vary so much. Physical variation, mental, cognitive variation, what they want, what they need, what they're interested in, what makes them fulfilled and happy, and so on. All this varies between individuals, across cultures, and so on. So there is no one right way to live. So the idea, the word utopia literally means no place, and that's right. There is no place for that. But I threw that in the book there, utopia, because in a way people are trying to create heavens on earth through these perfect societies that don't exist, and so they fail because not everybody is on board with this perfect way that you want, that you insist is the right way. So what do we do with these recalcitrant dissenters who won't go along? Unfortunately, historically, the way they've usually dealt with dissenters is the gulag. You lock them up or you kill them. And so this metric, this kind of utilitarian calculus of the greatest good for the greatest number, and we got to get rid of the dissenters that are harming us, standing in our way, has led to some of the biggest body counts in history. And it's no good. We have to abandon this idea that you can create a perfect world. It's a dangerous thing to aim for. What we should aim for is what I call protopia, not what I call it. Kevin Kelly calls protopia. That is progress incrementally, step by step, such that tomorrow is slightly better than today, but just slightly, just a little bit. And the next day is better than tomorrow, and so on. And things will just, the curve just slightly goes up, just ever so up, a tiny bit. And that way we can tweak the system. We have time to, stop, let's go a different direction, let's change this. And when I mean, I'm not speaking metaphorically here, I mean change the tax law, change the gun control laws, to speak of two subjects that are contemporary in America now. We have 50 different states, 50 different constitutions, state constitutions here. These are 50 different experiments. And we can kind of see what they do and what the results are. And then each state can change theirs based on what other states do by collecting data. And so in a way, democracy is like a scientific experiment.
Mm-hmm. Right. And do you think that one trait that, let's say, utopian scientists like the singularitarians, for example, have in common with the religious people and so on, is that they have a notion that things will follow a certain kind of teleology? That means that, for example, according to the singularitarians, that technology will develop according to a certain prediction they have, and that we will certainly reach that point where we can apply that technology to, for example, let us live forever or upload our minds or something like that.
Yeah, first of all, in terms of teleology, there's nothing inherently built into the universe that leads to necessary progress. Progress comes from us actively choosing to do certain things to make life better. There's no guarantee it's going to happen. There may be, crazy dictators and psychopaths that have a different idea of the good life, and they're happy to drag millions down with them. So we have to fight for it. You have to make it happen by working to change laws and things like that. But in terms of personally, yes, it's part of the purpose and meaningful leading a purposeful, meaningful life is to do things really to combat entropy, to push back against the universe that wants you dead. The universe doesn't care about us in terms of nature. We have to actively participate in pushing back against entropy of trying to lead long, healthy lives and so on. And this is what we've been doing. The average lifespan has doubled, just in the last century. Now, careful on that, because it's not to imply that everyone across the board is just living twice as long. What it is that there were people who lived in the 80s or 90s centuries ago, just not very many of them. So what all these public health measures have done, sanitation systems, vaccinations, public health, they've allowed more and more of us to reach the upper ceiling of about 120. So very few make it there, but up in the 80s, 90s, 100s, more and more people are moving up into that category, and but no one's going past it. No one's breaking through the ceiling, and the reason for that is that aging is built into our system. It evolved to do this. Our bodies evolved to last a couple generations, the length of a couple generations. That is, to get your offspring to reproductive age, and then their offspring to reproductive age. So you, as a grandparent, see your grandchildren grow into their 20s, and that's pretty much all you're good for as far as evolution is concerned. We don't need you anymore, because as good as grandparents are, great grandparents are not all that helpful, and great grandparents are gone, but if they weren't gone, they'd be essentially unnecessary, because you have so much family support down the chain that in terms of the allocation of limited resources and energy, trapping energy and consumption in an ecosystem, an environment, an economy, a society, you don't need that many generations. So the answer to the question, why do we die, is twofold: entropy, things run down, and the second, and natural selection, just operating to allocate precious resources where they're most needed, which is, again, in younger people rather than older people. So once you reach grandparent age or so, your usefulness drops off fairly quickly. And so all the systems break down at, say, late 80s, early 90s. It falls apart pretty fast. And there's not much you can do about it. Eating healthy foods, exercising, don't smoke, don't drink too much, have family, community, friends, loving relationships. That's it. It's really simple if you can do it. And but all that's going to do is get you further up to the ceiling. What the scientists want to do is re-engineer the entire genome and the biochemistry of cells so that they can keep dividing indefinitely. Where there are cells that divide indefinitely, they're called cancer cells. So you don't want to reprogram cells to divide indefinitely, and then everybody dies from cancer. Okay, so these are hard problems, and I'm sorry to say, we're not even remotely close to being able to do this. We're just not there, and so it's not going to happen in our lifetime, if ever. But again, like with the idea of an afterlife, I'm not against it. I hope the people working on these problems, the aging problems, solve specific problems along the way, like certain kinds of cancer that hit older people, and Alzheimer's, senility, dementia, these depression, these things that happen to older people. If we can solve these problems, that will increase the flourishing of our species, I think, going forward.
Right. And regarding the upload, or the possible upload of the mind, of course, we have many obstacles, and starting with the very concept of uploading consciousness, because we still don't really know what consciousness is about, right? And also don't know what in the brain, what patterns of activity correspond to consciousness, and even if we could code, or we could get lines of code representing all the activity that goes on in the brain, we haven't have enough knowledge yet to be able to, even if it was only a copy of the person and not the person itself, to have let's say a digital copy of the person with all her experiences and all that is necessary for her to be conscious, right?
That's right. Again, I think that the problem of identity is a substantial one here. A copy of you is not you, it's a copy. And the continuity of self from one moment to the next that happens in your head, you go to sleep, you wake up, you go under general anesthesia for surgery, you wake up. If you die and we copy you, you don't wake up. Now, maybe if you're frozen, like in cryonics, for 1,000 years, and we somehow wake you up, your point of view might be there. I could see that seems logical, but no one frozen to date is going to be brought back. I'm quite certain of that. And the technology would have to be improved a lot for this to work. And it's never been tried. I mean, no one's ever froze, say, a dog and brought him back, and it just hasn't happened. I mean, really frozen, not just chilled, frozen. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, and turning back again to the concept of protopia, so to have a protopian system, let's call it, we also need morality. And of course, we know from disciplines like evolutionary psychology that our moral sentiments have developed, are adaptations that we got from natural selection and so on. But we also need a moral system and moral values to be able to select among our several behaviors that we have available, and to select among our moral sentiments and how to act with one another and so on. And since you also talk a lot about religion and also had several debates with religious people and about religion and so on. Do you think that we can derive our moral values and our moral system only from scientific facts, or that we need at least something coming from, for example, philosophy?
Well, philosophy for sure, and science. I lump them all together: science and reason, science and philosophy, all under the umbrella of we're using our minds to try to figure out the best way we should live, and interact with each other in a moral way, and that these moral systems we derive through reason and empiricism. That is, looking out at the world to see how it really is. What are the causes of war? What are the causes of homicide and genocide? And the reason we want to know what the causes are is so we can attenuate those things, ratchet them down, get them close to zero as possible. Fewer wars, fewer homicides, and fewer genocides. And that is what we've been doing, under the idea that understanding the cause of things can lead us to change it, and B, we want to change it because we all have an instinct for life, and we recognize that other people have the same instincts that we have. They want to live, we want to live. And I'm not talking about people that are so depressed they're suicidal, or crazy terrorists that can't wait to go to heaven, so they're going to blow themselves up. I'm talking about normal people, that are just sort of going through their lives. By human nature, we have an instinct to live and thrive and survive and flourish. And the things that get in our way, they're there for a reason. We have to figure out what the reason is. Why do people die by car accidents? Well, because they weren't wearing a seatbelt. Okay, let's add seatbelts. These are sorts of little things we've been doing already that I think are due to the fact that we can understand the cause of things, which is what science does. So when I say science, I don't mean some guy in a lab coat in a lab. I mean just thinking scientifically. What's the cause of that? Because we want to change that. War, genocide, crime, auto accidents, whatever. And with the idea that flourishing of individual sentient beings is what our the purpose of life is. And so what can we do to get more of that? Mm-hmm. I wrote about this in more detail in my previous book, The Moral Arc.
Yes.
About the arc of the moral universe is bending toward justice, because we've been doing that very thing, science and reason. And so again, philosophy and science, these are all part of the same package. They didn't used to be separate. I mean, the word science didn't even exist until late in the game. It was really just natural philosophy. People during the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, the age of reason, the Enlightenment, would not have called themselves scientists or said what we're doing is science. They would have said this is natural philosophy. So it's all philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also read The Moral Arc, and I recommend it as well. It was a great book.
Thank you.
Okay, so what really is skepticism? Because I want to ask you this question because you're a skeptic, and I mean, I'm also part of a group of skeptics here in Portugal, and sometimes we get discussions around things like there being certain people that call themselves skeptics, but then think that being a skeptic is to doubt everything, or another alternative is to go along their ideology and to only doubt what does not go along with what they believe.
Right. So skepticism is not doubt. It's not just doubt, although it begins with that in the sense that scientists doubt things. The null hypothesis in science is that your hypothesis is not true until proven otherwise. Then we reject the null hypothesis at some level of confidence. Okay, that's kind of a scientific way of thinking about things. So you say, like, I believe in Bigfoot. Okay, show me the body and I'll believe too. But if you don't have a body, I'm not going to believe. And if you say, well, I have a cure for AIDS, or cancer, whatever. Okay, great. Show us. Let's see what you got. Let's test it, first before we turn it on the public. And everybody kind of has a sense. Yeah, that is how science works. So that's all we're talking about. I was a climate skeptic. Now I believe that global warming is real and human caused. I changed my mind because the evidence changed, and so it's not just doubt for doubt's sake. It's for evidence sake. We change our mind when the evidence is there, and we don't when it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes it really gets to, let's say, people beliefs and even personality. Because, for example, some of the discussions we've been having recently regard certain things that come from third wave feminists, like, for example, the gender wage gap and so on, then the many factors that go into it. And we get people from the group that because they only think that we should apply skepticism and science to things that don't go against their ideology, they don't really go along with these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, so there's been something of a split in the sort of skeptic circles about what we should be doing, where skepticism falls, and so on. Some of it radiates out into kind of secular humanist circles or atheist circles. Others into feminist movements and intersectionality and these sorts of things. Okay, it's gotten a little muddied, and I think the underlying current is the thing we should focus on is what's true, what we know, and then what we don't know, and what's kind of in between. And that again, some of this postmodernism, intersectionality, feminism, and all these kind of started completely reasonable out of the civil rights movement, which is good. And the study of literature and what does the text mean, those sorts of things, but they go too far. I mean, they sort of start morphing into relativism where nothing is true, everyone's opinions are equal, and these sorts of things that really went way too far. They're going too far right now, and so you're seeing something of a backlash and a pushback by a lot of us against some of that, the extreme versions of that. And of course, I'm a feminist, and I believe in women's rights. And equal treatment under the law, and equal treatment, everywhere in all aspects of society, for sure. But the stuff that you see on college campuses, it's just gotten crazy. I mean, it's just cray in terms of these protests and the vetoes, the heckler's veto, shouting down, deplatforming, microaggressions. Everybody's walking on eggs. All my students tell me that they self-censor just because they're so afraid to say anything in class. I mean, when I ask some questions that are kind of provocative, they're like, I don't know, is anyone else? They're afraid that they're going to get jumped on, and that's not a good environment for fostering critical thinking and skepticism and reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now that we are talking about that, what do you think is the importance that these recent developments in, let's say, university campuses and also with postmodern attitudes, do you think that this is something that we should really be aware of when we try to defend science from these attacks? Or that this is something that is temporary and that already happened a lot of different times in the past, and that we will get over it?
Oh, well, we'll get over it for sure. The pendulum swings back and forth. There were science wars in the 1980s and 1990s. Actually, science wars in the 80s with creationists. And then in the early 90s, the Holocaust deniers. In the late 90s, the whole kind of lit crit deconstructionist attacks on science that were really parodied in that great hoax, the Alan Sokal's hoax about quantum physics and all that. You know, that, and now we're seeing it again with intersectionality and third wave feminism and the sort of gender equality and, you know, all the LGBTQ and so on. Again, these things all start off completely reasonable, and then they just get carried away by extremists. And, you know, these social groups end up purging themselves and kicking out anybody who's not perfect and pure. And so they tend to fall apart on their own. And so, you know, I'm not worried that it's going to, you know, it's the end of Western civilization or anything like that. But it, you know, it is something we have to stay vigilant about, particularly the attacks on science.
Mm-hmm.
Science is the best tool we have, and we should nourish that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I tend to make a differentiation between what I call pseudoscience and anti-science. And what I mean by this is that I tend to call pseudoscience when people try to grab something that comes from science, but apply it without taking into consideration the scientific method, and anti-science simply being against science and not even caring about using scientific knowledge. Would you say that this is a fair distinction, or do you think that it's pretty much the same thing?
I'm not sure I quite follow that. Can you give me an example?
Okay, for example, I would call what Deepak Chopra does pseudoscience,
Oh, I see. Yeah.
and I would call, for example, the attacks that came from religious people, as you said, in the 80s and so on, and anti-science.
Yeah, certainly there is some of that still around, obviously. There's a lot of anti-science attitudes. Deepak's not anti-science for sure. He
Mm-hmm.
loves science. He thinks science is supporting his Eastern tradition worldview, sort of a Western Buddhism. And I'm not convinced of that. But still, he has a point of view that I think is at least defensible in the sense that he's defending it, and not just him. And so it's not really pseudoscience either. It's kind of on the fringes or the borderlands of science. Can't quite make out what it is. You know, the borderlands. You know, it's fuzzy. I think there's a lot of cutting edge. String theory maybe is a part of that kind of borderland science. Some of the research on consciousness, it's on the borderlands. You know, can't quite make it out. It's not pseudoscience, not an attack on science. It's not pure science or accepted science yet either.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Right. And since you wrote a lot about, for example, why people believe weird things, could you tell us a little bit about what are the innate cognitive mechanisms people come equipped with that render them susceptible to pseudoscience and so on?
Yeah, the short answer is that our brains are more like lawyers than scientists, defending our client. Our client is our beliefs, the beliefs we arrived at for, you know, non-smart reasons, emotional reasons, not just irrational reasons, tribal reasons, and then we employ our reason and abilities and intelligence and intellect to defending those beliefs, whether they're true or not. In our minds, of course, they're true, but we have to convince other people, and we're pretty good about doing that rather than trying to overturn our own ideas or debunk our own ideas, refute our own ideas. So Karl Popper famously called the process of science conjecture and refutation. I conjecture something, I hypothesize about it, I think it might be this, it might be that, and then everyone else tries to refute it. And usually they do. And if they don't, it doesn't mean I'm right, but it means that I haven't been refuted yet. So the confidence that my theory might be right goes up a little bit when there's no refutation. So most of what we're doing is conjecture and refutation. And most of the time we're wrong about even our own ideas. So this is why science is a very competitive enterprise, why scientists have thick skin, why most of the ideas that scientists come up with are not right. And so we have to be, that's why science has to be conservative and careful, skeptical. You know, don't believe it. Well, let's wait. Let's put that off. Let's collect more data. That's a normal thing to do.
Right. And would you say that due to the trends we've been seeing for the last, let's say, 200 years, and particularly from the last decades, that it is reasonable to be optimist and to think that we will keep improving our society, our global society, and that there's reasons really to be optimist and to think that we will get better and better with time?
Not inevitably. It's the kind of thing you have to work for, but we are doing that. So I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. I realize it's 3 steps forward, 2 back, 3 forward, 2 back. So we kind of get there slowly after lots of halts and stops and mistakes. And so I'm optimistic that, assuming we don't nuke ourselves or something, that we will keep going for many thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Our species is pretty robust. We're really good at solving problems that we can't even conceive of what the problems will be 1,000 years from now. But that whatever they are, I'm confident we'll fix it.
And would you say that perhaps the most important thing for us to keep progressing and having these developments is education, and particularly a scientific and rational education?
It's part of it. We know that people that have more information on a subject are more likely to believe it, but that those effects get erased if there's a political or ideological or religious component to the belief, in which case the facts will be put into service in support of the ideology, the belief, the religious, whatever belief. And so, unfortunately, there's that. So we have to not only give people more information, factual information about science, we have to teach people how science works, how critical thinking works, de-bias them, show them what the cognitive biases are, what the problems are going to be, how you're going to try to find confirming evidence for your belief and ignore the disconfirming evidence, so-called confirmation bias. All those things help, but still in the end, you need to get people, you need to decouple the belief from the scientific claim, the empirical claim about the world. You have to decouple that from, say, the political preferences or religious preferences that someone holds, because those are going to trump the facts.
Yeah, of course. So we have to always be attentive. So I think we could stop here. It was a great talk, I think.
Okay, thank you.
And has your book been selling well?
Yep, it's doing well. Yep.
Okay, great. That's great to know. So I had a good time with you.
For your viewers, they can order this on Amazon.
Whatever
country you're in. Yeah.
Yeah, I will put it in the description box. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so
all right.
Okay, take care.
All right, you take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. If you appreciate my work, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/thedissenter. Thank you.